And I think the next thing will be AI and keeping on top of that.
Yeah.
And therapists and people in the mental health industry who don't adopt that, you're going to die. AI is not going to replace you, but people that do AI will replace people that don't. That's what's going to happen.
Welcome to the Brainwaves podcast by Opus, where we sit down with industry leaders to unpack their journeys, explore key challenges, and talk about how they're shaping the future of behavioral health and healthcare technology. I'm your host, Shawn Rickenbacker. Today on Brainwaves, we're joined by Mark Nolte, the co-founder and CEO of Start Talking, an online therapy platform that makes it easier for people to access counseling through secure remote sessions. After experiencing the difficulty of seeking help himself, Mark was inspired to create a solution that was private, simple, and stigma-free. Start Talking has since grown into a nationwide network that partners with employers and insurers to offer virtual therapy as part of everyday mental health care. Mark, thanks so much for joining us today. Let's just start at the beginning.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. What drove you to start Talking?
So back in 2010, I was diagnosed with depression. And I tell people I was one of the lucky ones that went and got help, and now I live a much happier and productive life. But at the time, the hardest thing for me to do was go park my car in front of the psychiatrist's office, which is close to where I lived and worked. And then to go in the lobby and go like this, hoping I didn't run into someone I knew or worked with. And so after having that experience, I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. At the time, there was Skype, which was not that great a technology. Um, Back in 2016, I became one of the first Zoom customers. So I like to say I was Zoom before Zoom was cool. And I had talked to all these therapists about, hey, this is the trend. This is where it's going. You need to get on board. And like, Mark, it's just a fad. It'll never take off. I'm not interested. Um, well, then March 2020 hit, COVID hit. These therapists couldn't see their patients in the office for 2 years. So they were scrambling to try to figure out what to do. So all these therapists I've been talking to for years said, hey, Mark, that teletherapy thing you've been talking to me for 4.5 years, I'm ready to do it now. And can you have me set up by noon? So we went from doing uh, 20, 20% of our 27% of our video sessions by Zoom to 97% in 4 months. We quadrupled. And because we'd been set up with Zoom for over 4 years, I mean, we were ready. We weren't scrambling. We just, said, like, yeah, I'll have you a Zoom room there in 20 minutes, no big deal. And so, for once, my life is the right place at the right time. And the interesting thing is that there was a paper that was written in 2015 that said therapy wouldn't surpass in-office therapy till 2024. Well, COVID, March 2020, accelerated that by 4 years. And I tell people, I said, I probably would have been bankrupt if I had to wait till 2024 to do this. But now it's been amazing. I have therapists who are licensed in multiple states, and because they don't have to have a physical office anymore, I've got a lady that lives in a therapist that's lives in this little town in Idaho, and she's licensed in 11 different states, and she does it all by Zoom. And so it's, I mean, she's just rocking it. And I've got two therapists that live full time in an RV. You go from New York to Florida up and down the East Coast, and do therapy sessions from their RV thing. And I said, well, how's the Wi-Fi in the RV? The RVs have great Wi-Fi, and then one of them has Starlink, so it doesn't make any difference. So it's been amazing. And all these therapists I talk to now, after this has all happened, I said, well, what do you think of teletherapy? They go, well, I didn't like it at first. I was opposed to it, but now I really like it. And because I'm doing all teletherapy, I canceled my long-term office lease. I'm no longer paying $1,500 to do, an office lease. So that's money in my pocket, and I could be licensed in multiple states. So it's really changed things as far as, mental health and all that stuff. But my point being is that if it wasn't for COVID, we probably would still be sitting here trying to convert therapists over, but it accelerated the process and forced them into it. And now that they've done it for over 4 years, they like it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like obviously Start Talking was ahead of the curve with adopting Zoom as part of their practice. But I always hear on the show how big of an impact COVID has had in varying ways. You know, we talked to people who started to abuse substances during COVID or got depression or anxiety during COVID, lost their job, etc., and propelled them into space. But it sounds like since Start Talking had started 4 years, 3 years prior, you guys were able to grow so much because of the changes to the behavioral health space due to COVID.
Yeah. And then we did a pilot program initially to see what the how effective teletherapy was versus in-office therapy. And we found out there's a 30% less cancellation rate with online therapy because you don't have to, I live here in Denver, you don't have to drive to downtown Denver, pay for parking, get a babysitter if you got young kids. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you can just go on your laptop computer or your phone and have a therapy, put the kids down for a nap and have a therapy session. Or if you work in an office, you just close your office door, have a therapy session, and when you're done, you open your office door back up, and you don't have to take 4 hours off work to drive to the therapist, have the therapy session, and drive back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much more convenient, flexible. You got these hybrid options, but you're able to provide healthcare for underserved communities. That's one thing we talk to a
Yeah.
lot of people that work with rural communities and these underserved populations. Suddenly, care is available.
Well, exactly. And to give you to just to emphasize that point, here in Denver, we have the Western Slope, which is the western part of the Colorado, where it's 3.5, 4 hour drive to get into Denver to see a therapist. Well, now these patients can do it by Zoom and don't have to drive 6 hours round trip to see a therapist in Denver. And the other thing too is if you're a patient and you're fortunate enough to have a a therapist in your small town, well, the last thing you want to do is go park your car in front of Dr. Smith's office, which is on Main Street in this little town. And everyone goes by and say, "Hey, Joe, we saw your pickup truck in front of Dr. Smith's office. You going crazy or whatever?" And so, guess what? Joe doesn't go. But if Joe can get on his pickup truck, get on a smartphone, and do a teletherapy session, then yeah, he's going to do it.
That it like we had mentioned earlier, it breaks the stigma. It allows people to have a somewhat private experience, making sure they're able to receive the care they need without seeing their neighbors, their friends start asking questions. They can just start talking.
Well, and here's the other thing too, along with that thinking, is that you know when I went to the psychiatrist's office, I'm in this strange office I've never been in before, and I'm sharing my most intimate feelings. Well, I would feel more comfortable being in my home and doing that, around my comfortable surroundings, or maybe even my office versus some strange office. I mean, so it kind of lowers the barrier. And there's kind of been some studies showing that people are more open about sharing their mental health if they're in their home and comfortable.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. As far as the early vision for Start Talking, I know, a lot of entrepreneurs, they've got these fantastical ideas. How did you turn this from an idea into a functioning platform?
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, I've been in the medical device business for over 30 years. And so I was in the healthcare field and kind of knew what it is. But I was looking at mental health, and it's kind of the stepchild, if you will, of healthcare in general. So, and the people that tried to do something, they were therapists who tried to be entrepreneurs, but they're really great at what they're trained to be, and that's to be therapists, but they're not very good business people, and they're not, especially very good marketers in their practice. So I saw this opportunity because primary care doctors, some try to help, but a lot of them just want to get it off their plate. It's like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to send you to a therapist or whatever. It's hard to evaluate mental health, versus physical health. So it was kind of the stepchild and never addressed. So I saw this as an entrepreneur and a businessman. I saw this opportunity in mental health where the interesting thing is that telemedicine, in other words, physical health, had taken off like crazy. And you still have to, touch the patient, take their pulse or whatever type thing, but it still worked. I'm thinking with mental health, you're doing nothing different than you would being in your office talking to them. So it's not like the therapist has to change their technique or how they do it or whatever. And so that's why I saw this opportunity and I saw that it worked for physical health. And why would it work for mental health? And you don't have to change your techniques or whatever. So, and no one was really, you know, doing anything about it. And there were times when I doubted myself. I'm thinking, well, I'm not a psychiatrist or person in the field. So why do I think this can work if the people in the field don't think it can work? But I stuck with it and proved them wrong.
Yeah, I mean, behavioral health has been in a unique space as far as healthcare goes, where with behavioral health, like you said, it's a conversation that you're having. And so we are able to have this across the board, be able to receive care regardless of where you are, as long as you've got a Wi-Fi connection, you're able to connect with a therapist.
Exactly.
I know we talked about how Start Talking is huge now. I'm reading that Start Talking now spans 43 states. What's been hardest and most rewarding about scaling a telehealth therapy platform nationally?
Yeah. So, you know, uh, part of it was getting, like I mentioned earlier, therapists on board with doing teletherapy. Uh, and this is not a knock to therapists, but they're great at what they're trained to be therapists, but they're not very good business people, so they don't understand the expense you have to spend with marketing and all that stuff to do this, and they think they should get paid, 100% of their fee or whatever type thing, and so our business models, we take a percent from the administration fee from the hourly rate, so that's how we make our. So we're incentivized to make sure that they get therapy, or I'm sorry, that they get referrals. The hardest thing is recruiting therapists, getting them on board. And then, like I said, they're not tech savvy. So sometimes they have to fill out their profile and get do some tech stuff. And they struggle with that. And because of that, they don't complete the process of onboarding. And so we do as much hand holding as we can. However, there's so much only that we can do, and there's some parts of it they just have to do themselves. So that's been a struggle.
Absolutely. It sounds like Start Talking obviously manages a lot of the business side, the marketing side. As we talked about,
Right.
a lot of clinicians, therapists, they want to focus on the people, but you're able to take care of that for them so that more people can receive care and these clinicians can give more care.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll share with you is that we came up with a product called, well, I came up with it. It's a AI product. It's called Therapist Assistant. And what it does, it takes the clinical notes of the therapist and writes it puts it in a format in less than 30 seconds with 94% accuracy. Well, and they have to write it what they call a SOAP note, which is an acronym for subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. Well, it takes them 15 to 20 minutes to write this from scratch, and we can do it in 30 seconds. So, to put in perspective, if they see 5 patients a day, that's 100 minutes in time savings from doing that record. So, if they see 5 patients a day, 5 days a week, that's 6 to 8 hours of time saving at the end of the week. That's a 3-day weekend or
Yeah,
another day to see patients. And therapists want to operate what they call at the top of their license. In other words, they don't want to be clerical people, and be doing these notes. They want, if they can have something else that does it for them and they can, see more patients and do more therapy, then they're all on board with that.
absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. And obviously anytime we can save the therapists to see more patients or take more time for themselves is just more that we are giving back to the patients.
Right. And that allows them just to be therapists and not have to be clerical people. And then, yeah. So, and then we do all the billing and claim filing and all that stuff, and they don't have to do that. So that's a big plus as well.
Love that. It sounds like Start Talking is a great option for therapists that just want to help people. And you're
Right.
able to become a part of a network, receive referrals, and just help more people since the clerical and the business part of it is taken care of.
Yeah, exactly.
Love that. I love that. As far as scaling goes, I know we've talked about the difficulty of getting clinicians on board with the tech savviness. Now, I know we had talked previously as well about your background in healthcare and med tech. I guess what have the main differences been for moving to the behavioral health space? Like, what is the main changes you've felt in that move?
Versus physical, working in the physical health or healthcare side. Yeah. Well, there's some similarities in dealing with insurance or whatever, but sometimes mental health is not as reimbursed as well as it should be, versus physical health, and that's been a problem. And then, I'll give an example. Like during COVID, Medicare and Medicaid allowed sessions to be done by video, by teletherapy. Well, now they just passed a regulation starting next year that they're not going to honor doing teletherapy. It has to be in office therapy, and I think that's a really big mistake because of all the things we just said of the advantages of mental health. And so, again, if someone from the Western Slopes got to drive 3 hours one way or 6 hours round trip to see a therapist, guess what? They're probably not going to get the therapy they need.
Yeah. If somebody has to make that drive, like you mentioned earlier, maybe find a babysitter for their kids, find time away from their busy life. People are going to cancel their appointments. They're just not going to find care. If they have to see all their neighbors on the way and have to put their head down and try to avoid those awkward conversations, like those add barriers. We're just trying to remove those barriers to care for people across the board.
Exactly. And, when it first started teletherapy, people, they were like, well, teletherapy is not as effective as in office therapy. Well, then they came out two papers showing that it's just as effective, in some ways even more, because people are more relaxed in their home environment or whatever. So that took that off the table. So it's not like, what I don't understand why Medicare and Medicaid's not reimbursing for that, because it's not like it's a second class way of doing therapy or not as effective. It's just as effective, in some aspects, even more effective. So it's a decision on their part, but I think it's going to be a big mistake.
It removes barriers and it helps to ensure quality of care, ensure that the patient is comfortable. And it sounds like, especially with Start Talking, it just makes it so easy for the therapists who are on board to get those
Yeah,
referrals, help more people, etc.
yeah. And there's a shortage of therapists in the United States, and so if a therapist can scale themselves, so to speak, and see, for like the state of Colorado, they could see anybody within the state of Colorado. That's going to affect be more effective getting into more patients. And then if they can be licensed in multiple states, where there's certain states that have shortages for therapists, then they can help out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me, obviously you've scaled so much since 2017 to this year. What's next for Start Talking? Are there any innovations or expansions that you're especially excited about?
There's a huge opportunity for AI in mental health. And I gave you the one with the therapist assistant writing the notes, but that's just the top of the iceberg, so to speak. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and we're going to start talking. It's kind of starting to work on this. Is that so? A therapist, sees the patient once a week. So let's say they meet every Wednesday. So from Wednesday to Wednesday, the patient writes a journal about their life and what's going on. Well, the therapist has to go through and read through that 7 days worth of journaling. Well, we're going to develop an AI product that's actually going to read through those 7 days of journaling for the therapist and say, hey, therapist, here are four things from the 7 day journal that you need to address with your patients when you see him on Wednesday. And so the therapist doesn't have to go through and read the 7 days of journaling and analyze. Now they can always go back and check it or make sure it's right or whatever, but that's going to be a huge time savings. And then the other thing too is just taking AI and diagnosing the patient. So, in other words, the therapist goes, well, I think this patient has depression. Well, AI could say, yeah, there's an 80% chance this patient has depression. I'm like, okay, that's good. It confirms. But there's also a 70% chance this patient has anxiety. The therapist's like, well, I missed that. I didn't even see that. So now I need to address not only depression, but anxiety. So it can be a confirmation for the therapist that they're taking the patient down the right direction for to getting the right therapy versus missing something. So and the ironic thing is I go to these different groups and I found out that people are actually using Chat GPT for their therapists. Now, if I did that as a company, I'd be sued at the yin yang, you know, but they're doing it. And, you hear all these stories, horror stories about what can hallucinate and do all this stuff wrong, and it can, but they're starting to put things in like if they're thinking about contemplating taking their life by suicide, either alert their therapist or call 911, type thing or whatever type deal. So, but it's interesting because, ChatGPT is available 24/7. If you're waking up 3 a.m. in the morning and you can't sleep and you need to talk to someone, you could do it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that and if anything evolves with it. So, but like I said, if you're a corporation or whatever, or a therapist, you'd probably be sued. It doesn't stop it doesn't stop an individual from doing that if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that is so true. There's so much stuff in the behavioral health space and healthcare space in general where AI is going to make marginal improvements over time, help us to break down barriers and ensure that there's a high quality of care for patients and just that it's available. So I love
Right.
hearing more about the cool things that Start Talking is doing.
Yeah. There's gonna be a huge opportunity with that, with AI. So that's
Definitely.
kind of where we're taking because that's cutting edge and most therapists aren't gonna do that or, develop it themselves. So we'll develop the product and maybe add it on to our therapist assistant that writes the clinical notes. And, if nothing else, it's like it just confirms what they're thinking. And again, if they miss something or whatever. So, but to answer your question, there's a huge opportunity with mental health and AI.
100% agree. 100% agree.
Yeah.
We are starting to come up on time. I always ask this question though, Mark. Do you have any book recommendations?
Wow. I used to read a lot of books and I don't so much anymore. But what I do is I read the Wall Street Journal every day. And, you know, there's a lot of, there's almost an article every other day about AI. And if you want to keep up with AI, and even though the examples they use is in a different industry, I'm always thinking about, well, okay, how can I take this AI application that was over here in marketing, maybe use it in mental health or something like that or whatever type thing? Because it's always interesting and mind-boggling what they can do. And sometimes I look at that and go, well, gee, we could modify that and use that in mental health or whatever or something, or that's what's going to happen down the road or whatever type thing. So I would just, I read a lot of the Wall Street Journal. I read articles on LinkedIn about AI and stuff like that. So, and then I live here, in, like I said, Denver, and we're really close to Boulder, Colorado. I'm 17 miles from Boulder, which is a Colorado University of Colorado, and there's a lot of AI meetup groups that are there. And so I'm 69 years old, and I'm amazed how people in their 50s don't even know Chat GPT or how to use it. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm the old guy here, and I know more about AI and Chat GPT than you do in your 50s or even 40s. I told this lady in her 40s, and she goes, yeah, I thought about using it, but I just don't know. And I started telling her how she could use it. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it's a matter
So,
of keeping up with the times. It sounds like obviously you've been keeping up and Start Talking's been keeping up. Like you said
yeah.
before, you're ahead of the scale with Zoom in 2016. So love
Yeah, and
that.
I think the next thing will be AI and keeping on top of that. And therapists and people in the mental health industry who don't adopt that, they're going to die. And I've heard these things. It's like AI is not going to replace you, but people that do AI will replace people that don't. That's what's going to happen.
Definitely. Definitely. There is still that need for humanity and human touch, but AI
Exactly.
makes you capable of doing more.
Exactly. You can scale yourself. And like I said, at the top of your license and not be a clerical person, if you will, because AI can take care of all that.
Absolutely. And thanks, Mark, for being on the show today. I think you've had some awesome insights for our listeners. How do they reach you? How do they learn more about Start Talking? And for any therapists that want to join Start Talking, how can they
Yeah,
reach out?
just simply go to our website. It's www.starttalking.io. So again, www.starttalking.io, and you can see all our therapists there. If you're interested as a therapist, you have a provider tab. You can join our organization, and would love to hear from anybody who might be interested, either whether they're a patient or a therapist.
Yeah, and it sounds like a great organization to join.
Yeah, well, thank you.